It had not been a great year. Although my wife's treatment for breast cancer was going well, we still carried a mantle of anxiety and fatigue. In addition, the medical confirmation of something we already internally accepted, namely my 67-year-old father's early dementia, threw a heavy, wet woolen blanket of disbelieving despair over that mantle. The holiday was my mother's idea. Desperate for a little bit of light, she said, "Let's go away. Somewhere nice, somewhere hot." And whilst I wrestled with that idea, with the responsibility of leading our damaged family on a summer break, a holiday was booked, and to Portugal we went. And it was great. The kids had a ball, in and out of the pool, throwing themselves into the daily entertainment laid on for them. Gradually we relaxed, we exhaled, and believing we were on top of things, sure, it was all fine. We booked a day out. We booked the Jeep Safari. And the next day, suitably attired, laden down with good things to eat, we wandered down to the centre of the village. My wife, looking stunning, though her hair was still a bit short to be fashionable. My children, Faye, 8, enthusiastic, gung-ho. Peter, 4, funny and boisterous. My mother, glamorous as ever, coiffure and attire under tight control. And my father, an all too recently retired senior civil servant, still standing tall, but following rather than leading. As we approached our rendezvous, passing dazzling adobe villas, he nudged my wife and said, without a hint of irony, "Bangor's fair changed, hasn't it?" To which my wife replied, "Yes, it has, Bill." We were allocated a driver and clambered into the back of an open-topped Spanish Land Rover lookalike. Within minutes we were bouncing around as the Jeep climbed up slowly gravel lanes into the hills that fringe the Algarve. The views were stunning, the colours magnificent. We stopped at a farm where the children could pet animals and crafts could be perused. Lunch was served. A classic peri-peri chicken. But the thing that stood out at lunch was the wine. Appropriately, it was a white. Beyond that, things went rapidly downhill. Accordingly, 2/3 of it sat undrunk at the end of the meal. The kids ran off for one last pet of the goats, and I returned to purchase some artisanal goods, leaving my dad to rest. When we returned, however, the wine was gone. The bottle was still there, but now it was empty. To this day, I've no idea how he achieved it, but Dad had drunk the lot and now dozed peacefully in his chair. We roused him, ushered the children into the back of the Jeep, and were off again. And within the hour we reached our next stop, the lake. By now it was scorchingly hot, and Pedro indicated, and we gratefully accepted, that it was time to swim. Now my father had been a champion swimmer in his youth, and after changing he set off with long languid strokes across the lake. I accompanied him, and when we reached the far side I indicated that we should return. And as we neared the shore I heard the jeeps beeping their horns, indicating that swim time was over. I hurried to the beach and helped the children ashore, where my wife and I dried and dressed them. Pointing them in the direction of my grandmother, or their grandmother, my wife said, "Where's your dad?" "Where's my dad?" I looked along the shore. No, just other families packing up. I looked across the lake. No, calm and empty. I looked along the lake, and squinting into the sun, in the distance I could detect the slow rising and falling of my father's front crawl. I ran back into the water and began the chase. Now, I'm no swimming slouch, But by the time I drew near, he was starting to wade waist deep towards the shore, where a second phalanx of jeeps had pulled up. Young men were piling out of them and running into the water, and as I struggled to draw near, my father started to splash them. Not in a gentle sort of splish-splash sort of way, but in a full-on Pete Townsend, both arms going round, windmill sort of a way. I laid my hand upon his shoulder. He turned to me and his face turned from glee to shock. You? Yes, Dad, I know. We have to go. We swam back up the lake as quickly as we could to where Pedro and the other drivers were hopping and pacing. We clambered on board, dripping in our swimmers, and the jeeps roared off and up onto the plateau. The gravel track spread out. We climbed to a massive flat plain. The jeeps fanned out and then ran along each other side by side. The hot air was only beginning to dry the dust onto my skin when the water began to hit us. Pedro indicated the trunk in the back and I opened it and pulled out loaded super soaker water pistols ready to go. The passengers in the other jeeps had already started the water war and we were their intended targets. I armed my squealing kids. Dad, initially startled, suddenly got it and he grabbed a weapon. Ignoring Pedro's remonstrations, he grabbed the bars of the jeep and stood. Bracing himself against the bumps, he poured water first into one jeep and then into another. As we approached the road and the water ran dry, he raised his water pistol to the sky and let out a piercing "Yee-haw!" He was Butch Cassidy. He was Wild Bill Hickok. He was Billy the Kid. When we arrived back at the complex, having thanked Pedro vigorously and tipped him generously, we were exhausted, hungry, and thickly coated in a fine orange dust which never washed out of our clothes. My mother's makeup was askance and her hair looked like bracken in the autumn. We were beat, but not beaten, and my father still had a glint in his eye. Dementia is a tough thing for those who suffer it, and possibly even harder for those who care for them. But occasionally there's a silver lining, glinting briefly and slither thin, but they're to be treasured in the present and in the future as a momentary glimpse into the past.